Players, and
Okay,
it's hard to follow if you're just getting the.
I'm gonna go ahead and start the recording if we're ready. And we are, YouTube is going.
Okay, welcome everyone to the April 15, 2025 work session of the Planning Commission. My name is Mark Sakamoto. I'd like to call the roll. Commissioner Abbey. Commissioner Dickinson.
Here.
Commissioner Gosselin. Here. Commissioner Hogan. Here. City Planner Catherine Gunther. Here. And City Recorder Kimmy Jackson.
Here,
Okay,
any members absent? No members?
no members are absent.
Thank you.
The agenda has been published and is available on the corner table there, as well as online. I think the one thing on our work session today is to review the Cascadia Partner materials, which I hope everybody has had a chance to look at. They're kind of extensive. Mary, would you like to just start off and talk about?
Meeting that we had was yeah. And what we did was listen to the information that Textpedia has gathered regarding looking through different title items and looking at options and things that could assist us in addressing some of the housing issues that we have. So what they did was they came up basically with draft code concepts, and essentially they were identifying code amendments that needed to be in compliance with state rules, replacing, removing code provisions that would discourage housing production through unreasonable costs and delays, and encouraging the diversity of housing options and units, and encouraging development, simplifying and streamlining, clarifying some of the codes. And what they did was they took it and set it out into kind of a color coded at it. Information that they have, it's divided into essentially 7 sections. They did. This is to look at might be changing some of those things, looking at how some of our codes aren't right up to snuff. And also then what they did was they looked at clear and objective standards, which I think was probably one of the most interesting parts. And that was presented to us not at the time of our meeting, but as a separate handout that I thought was actually kind of wonderful.
Yeah.
Because it's a clear and objective standards. Yeah. And they came out with looking at how different areas could possibly be amended and evaluated. And then the other thing that they had too was barriers to housing projects, and they listed those according to use, middle housing, rezoning, regulations for residential and commercial zones, and then affordable housing incentives. So hopefully you guys had a chance to take a look at that. I found it pretty interesting. And it actually looks like might not have in some areas such huge chunks to work on, which also is pleasant. I was looking at it and thinking it is look at what I call low hanging fruit. Things that don't need major changes, but small, applications or sometimes just a word change. And one of the ones that kind of came up in the conversation during the Cascadia meeting was the term family. That was one that I was thinking, if we could make that change, maybe could do is present that to the city council as kind of an individual word change. And then that would allow us to go ahead and make some other significant changes without presenting them with just a massive load of stuff after months of work. But, you know, simple change like that. That was Catherine's recommendation and for, you know, idea as well.
It's one of the things that's come up in discussing the townhouse project down here and trying to pinpoint exactly what is it that is where people are maybe not playing by the rules, and it sort of comes down to our definition of a single family residence. And we define that as a place having one kitchen, so shared cooking, also occupied by one family or housekeeping unit. And the way we define family is kind of archaic. That it's really sort of the 1950s, related by blood, marriage, adoption. It's in our code. So I've sort of been joking for years that I was looking for the perfect household to let me take this to the Supreme Court. Yeah, basically you can have a family related by blood, marriage, adoption, guardianship, plus two random other people. I don't know why we hit on the number two, but I'm sure there was a reason at the time. So completely unenforceable and not at all maybe what we're looking for workforce housing, or I don't think anybody's wanting to shut down the idea of 3 or 4 responsible roommates sharing a household unit. So they had zeroed in on that as well as something that was completely illegal, archaic. And they suggested they had switched from family to household. Just that one word, with a definition of household being, you know, that all share a lease agreement, for example. So it's not like a random subletting, people coming and going sort of thing. But I think is something that would fit our model and not have us knocking on doors asking for DNA tests and marriage licenses. And so that seemed like that would play in kind of nicely to some of the things we were already talking about. And as we get into some less conventional household units, to kind of decide, do we want to put any kind of cap on that, or do we leave that to state fire marshal? Because they would have something to say about how many people per bedroom, although our vacation rental code does say this is what we think is a reasonable occupancy for a 2 or 3 bedroom house. But just to take a look at what some other communities have done, and if that little change, I think, would help us a lot in current enforcement and also just going forward, how we decide who gets to live in which of these new kinds of housing styles we're building.
Good question. Are they recommending that we do all of the definitions? Are there any other definitions now, or just this the one about family?
So I think the idea was that there's some things we could do without without months and months of discussion. And I think I already saw sort of, yeah, that's something we could tackle right now. It got kind of problematic when we took about 2 years worth of code amendments from all over Title IX and tried to do those all as a batch. It just gets the bookkeeping end of things. And it costs us less now than it used to in terms of staff time to send a notice out. So we used to do that as a way of saving postage and staff time. Just not to have multiple public hearings. We get a whole bunch of changes together and do them all at once. I think we can afford the staff time and the postage. We're doing them on postcards to do bite-sized ones as we go along, so that we're not flipping back. What did we say 2 years ago? I think we got it all sorted out with our last round of Title IX stuff, but it spanned several commissions and,
Yeah, I think what I was asking was if they are recommending that we change the definitions first and then work on the actual code sections.
oh, well, so I think it would be relatively straightforward to do both. Because we use family quite a bit in
So
multiple
just
family,
concentrate
single
on family
family.
first.
So if we just did that and say,
Okay.
where do we use that in the code and does that have the desired effect if we change family to household unit here?
Mhm.
Does that work all the way through from single family to multifamily? And then just do that whole thing across all sections of the code. And like I say, that would help right now for some enforcement kinds of things. We do have a municipal judge. She's been sworn in. I think she's going to be fabulous. She wants to kind of work with you guys to figure out where there might be vague, what, if anything, we want to tighten up. Where are we just sort of assuming we all know what we're talking about? And this was one of the first things I found myself discussing with her was that I don't think that's enforceable at all. I don't know that it's what we want to be enforcing. I think there's something else we're after there. Which is going to just all being under one lease as a start.
Yeah, and I'm also thinking in terms of, we start presenting changes in alternatives like ADUs or bench suits and things like that. But people are gonna start asking, well, how many people can live in those? If we just start saying a family or a living unit and not being able to define that, I think that may raise some objections in the community. 10 people, 20 people, how many people living? So, yeah,
I think that would
help us to nail that down so that we'll be able to tell people, this is what you're approving, this is our vision of who and how many people, what people to be living in this particular place. So and I forget, is that something that the definition? Is that something that Cascadia Partners was going to come up with, or is that in our court to come up with?
it was something that I've been struggling with because it's not working for us right now. And then in their list of things that were not quite in line with the rest of the world
Right.
in 2025, that was one that they had singled out as well. And you got a smile out of me. So yeah, I think they can certainly tell us this is what other places who are several years ahead of us are doing. I don't think it's going to be all that complicated.
I don't think
It was like that, we were just behind one.
A lot of the stuff on the manufactured dwellings, mobile homes, RV parks and RVs. And we've known that for a while because there were a lot of changes made on the state level where they basically said you can't pick on these kinds of housing because it's an effective way. But yeah, so we just can't enforce that anymore. So I'll sometimes point to a section of the code and say it says it in there, but it's not enforceable. So they are going to help us clean that stuff up. Tiny homes are a good example. Depending on how and if the tiny home is affixed to the land it's sitting on, it can be classified in one of several ways. And one is as an RV. So when we're talking about RVs in our code, we're thinking about the thing you roll up in. And so a lot of our code, well, in fact, we define an RV park and then we never mention it again. We just say, we're not doing that. But what the state is saying now is you've got to consider all of these things. We have some code for manufactured dwelling parks, but we only allow it in certain zones. State says that's no longer allowed. We have a minimum size in acres that's prohibitive. This can't do that either. We have some guidelines for landscaping that we don't impose on other kinds of homes. So Cascadia can certainly streamline all of that for us because they flagged the places and they were more thorough. I thought they were going to point out the obvious, but they got us in some other things. This whole clear and objective standard challenge is taking a life of its own, and it's kind of interesting. But sometimes there are sort of subtle prejudices.
That's about did was they took our code and compared it to the state code. And reference the state code areas that we need to pay attention to and look at. Things that we talked about a little bit was the fact that in some instances we could simply just adopt the state code. And here is really straightforward, really doing it and not have to try and invent our own rules and regulations.
And we got off to a slow start with that in the early days of everybody in Oregon adopting municipal code. The trend was to regurgitate the entire Oregon revised statute into your own code instead of just pointing to basically the statute you're adopting. So as those two things diverged, we're now years behind. And so, yeah, Mary had pointed that out right away, that we could just as easily say, here's our code dealing with manufactured dwelling parks. It's ORS blah, blah, blah. And then if it does start to diverge from that, it will be intentional, not just that we never went back and read it again, which is sort of what's happened to us and a lot of other communities. So that part might be a pretty easy fix now, is to just go in and all those places where we have code that's 30 years out of date, just point at the current relevant statute or statutes, assuming we've all read them and with them.
Did Cascadia, I mean, if we do that, I mean, that's kind of just the zeros thing we should do. But you could also add to that, right? I mean,
Oh, yeah.
if it's legal, we can make other, did they make recommendations for that, things it would add?
I don't know that they did in this pass,
Yeah.
but some of this is, well, first we need to take away a lot, because a lot of things that we're saying just aren't legal anymore. And we need to think of these different kinds of housing in a different way than we did when it was an old single wide that rolled in on a trailer or something. We can add. So this is where it gets complicated. In some cases, we can't be more restrictive.
Right.
In some cases, we can't be less restrictive, but you kind of get the flavor of the thing. If the goal in these new rules was to help to increase housing production, and we are doing something that works towards that goal, then I think we could enhance the Oregon revised statute, if you will, but we can't work against that goal. And I think as we start going through it, it'll become pretty obvious that, and I just try to keep that picture of the tiny home or something else that doesn't fit the 1970s image that we all have of mobile homes. Tranquility Village up there and Walport was one of the first in the county. And they decided to approach it almost entirely as RVs. So I was sort of hoping that they would do a few more of those permanently attached to the land, so we'd get to see how it worked with the different classifications of basically the same couple 100 square foot box. But I think that could be interesting for us. So first we'll do, what did you call it? The bare minimum, we'll get in compliance with the state law, but we can certainly think a little outside that box.
So what are the next steps then?
I was just gonna ask that question. So it sounds like, the definition of a living unit or family unit or whatever. Like, speaking of low hanging fruit, the manufactured housing, RV parks. I don't know, is the tiny homes, do you think that's something that's?
Well, so that's gonna fall into some of those things just automatically because the way definitions of RVs have change.
Sure.
So it can now include a school bus conversion so it's a much broader definition now on the state level. But definitely tackling some of those early on so that our definitions are accurate before we start thinking where we are or are not going to allow some of those things or under what circumstances. At least we'll all be clear on what it is we're talking about. And that's again, something that I think they can do in a really sort of methodical, at least for our starting point, to say, this is what you have to do to get into compliance. We can look at that and say, do we want to go another step in this?
I mean,
Category.
that's kind of protocol. They should come up with a concrete proposal for something that we should adopt. And then we should review it and say whether we agree or not.
And so the first pass on that, it's not even it's here's what the state says you have to do.
Well, they'll
Maybe good practice
tell
for,
us the exact.
yeah, absolutely. And they're prepared to
Yeah,
do
do
that.
to say, yep, that's good.
And we've sort of fallen under the radar because of our small population size. They haven't come for us yet. But most places in the state have already done this. So it's really gonna be,
That's easy.
here's what you need to strike, here's what you need to add, here's the markup. This is the code you need to adopt as your starting point.
Yeah.
And then if you want to add some Yahat's flavor on top of that. But at least for that part, I think they're prepared to just hand us the template.
Make it so.
Alrighty.
So do we need to pass on some sort of communication to Cascadia Partners saying this is how we think the first things that you should look at and come back to us with and give them that list and then if they can go further than that, that's great.
Yeah, and I think having the two-way, that's part of why having a couple of you guys in on all the meetings, taking whatever thoughts planning commission
Because we
has.
actually have a meeting,
It's later this week.
yeah, like
Um,
Thursday or something.
But the other thing, so there's gonna be several, well, they want to start with this advisory committee, which is larger than this project management team. So the project management team was just sort of about getting us to this point, getting the ball rolling.
Yeah.
So that's something I think is on the agenda for the regular meeting, if you guys want to think about some recommendations for that. But then they're also going to be taking public input from the community as a whole, and I think that's going to be more interesting. It's going to be interesting to me to see how accurately maybe we have or have not gauged public response to some of these things. But yeah, I think a memo going back to them every time is not a bad thing. Just say, this is what the planning commission talked about. Yes, go for the low hanging fruit. Get the boring stuff done, the cookie cutter, let's just do that. And then we'll go from there.
Okay.
Because even just the stuff that doesn't take a whole lot of creative thinking still takes a minute just to get through the hearings and code adoption.
Right, then, and the third thing with them, I'd like to start talking to them about when they think we can have a public meeting. So,
So it was on one of their timelines early on. And they proposed several of them. We did them in the evenings before. We'll know when we're getting close, and that's one of the city's obligations under our agreement, is to sort of set all that up, post it, if you will. Yeah, but I don't know that, I'm already pushing back a little at the idea of broadening the project management team, doubling that in size until we sort of know which way we're rolling, but it's probably a good time to start that. We need to have a sense of focus, I think, before we invite the entire community in to start with.
yeah. Because what we're gonna discuss with the community is gonna be probably different than this thing. We're gonna be talking to them, the community about ADUs and setbacks, increasing density and stuff like that, I assume. Which is. Minutia.
Yeah, we don't need to involve them in you know, especially the stuff that's just us getting current with state law, that's not optional and it's probably not of interest. They tend to do, Cascadia tends to do a pretty good job of having it be a good visual presentation. So rather than say, how do you feel about cottage clusters on your block? You know, how do you feel about this versus that versus this other thing in this area or that area? I think we'll get some useful feedback. A lot of times I found people object to the terms, but then when you point out, hey, there's already one right over here. Oh, well, I don't mind that thing. So they're sort of good at not tricking people into, but helping people understand that it's maybe not as big and scary a change as it sometimes seems.
Yeah, sure.
Are we gonna require, public input for these definition changes too?
Any code amendment, we
Any
go through
code?
the same process.
If we
So
still would
if
have
we-
to have public. input.
everybody gets notified, yeah. So that's another opportunity and sort of another reason maybe to be doing that in parallel with some of the other work, because then it is another opportunity to get word out to the public that this is what we're.
Yeah, you know, I have some concern that as we're talking about these things and start putting the definitions in front of the public, they're gonna be asking us questions that we really would be answering in the next phase. So we really should be prepared for how we put that with them. In other words, if they say, well, what's your definition? What code changes are you gonna put in place? We haven't discussed that yet. So I think we ought to be ready for that.
Well, I think we could, so for example, the single family, I think we could.
Single family is
just on
pretty
that
straightforward,
and
but
say-
I'm thinking of the ADU.
Oh, yeah, and I'm not saying
Terminology
necessarily,
and
so I'm not suggesting that we do like we did before, all the definitions. I'm sort of suggesting instead of this kind of approach, we do
Just
this
do
kind of
the
approach.
family.
Like, here's a definition that's problematic, and then this is all the places that appears in the code. And see if we can kind of. Sorry, that's looking very. So a different approach than we took before, and there's also, we're not under any pressure of time when we're doing these code amendments, so if we say, we're gonna table this until we get further down the path on this topic or that topic, we can set it aside. So just because we've introduced it doesn't mean there's a clock that's ticking and we have to make a decision.
Sort of talking about this first stage is sort of long.
Yeah,
It's just like.
and if it is, then they can take it up with someone in Salem because it's basically us saying we're catching up. Yeah, and I don't think it will be, it's just our terminology is archaic. Yeah. I don't know, someone might be upset, but I don't see it. Yeah.
In those documents, I know there was a lot of stuff in there. Does anybody have any questions or ideas about? It's a lot of stuff in. Questions about. So far, was.
For something that probably won't, we'll get to.
But nothing, I mean, I didn't see anything. Red flags.
No.
We did talk about, there was one thing we did talk about, it's in the notes that. It had to do with the. Design standards. They also had some suggestions or had some ideas about. What we could do, things that would be not subjective. And be objective. So I think that's a conversation. But it's not actually in the documentation of the coachings, whatever they sent us, I don't think. But it's something that I think we need to keep bringing up around. You know, we started down that path and keep that in mind when we start getting more and more into housing or whatever the housing alternatives design in those kinds of things.
What about the other goal we can discuss was the no more bottom journals?
That's already addressed in the code.
Yeah, so
So is that,
after Dollar General came in, the planning commission at the time made some changes and referred to them as formula businesses. And there are really only a couple of lines of code. So we basically can't say no franchise ever allowed. But what we can say is you can be here, but you can't necessarily look like you do in other places. Kind of what Europe did to McDonald's.
So is there,
McDonald's can come in, but there are no golden arches.
so is the way that, is there a specific design by?
Yeah, so you have more flexibility with formula businesses than with other things. Let me see if I can do a quick search here. And for all the outrage, it was a surprisingly small change to the code, and either my fault or in my defense, it was a moment where I looked away from Yahoo Planning. The year I was not involved, but yeah, so we have a definition of formula businesses. Basically says where the look and feel is dictated by to the franchisee. And then we only allow them as a conditional use, not an outright use. Giving the planning commission some. So formula business means a business that is required by contractual or other arrangement to adhere to prescribed standards and features, particularly for exterior color schemes, signs, or architectural design.
It's something like what we have under us.
Yeah. So then rather than saying those are permitted use outright in the C1 zone, we say that's a conditional use, you need to come, and so the planning commission could say no golden arches or yeah, whatever else. I don't know why I'm picking, I must be hungry. But so it really was a surprisingly small change in the code, but by putting it in that conditional use category, gives the planning commission some flexibility there. There's an opportunity to weigh in on some architectural guidelines if you will.
Yes. That meeting. Well, and the Times City brought forward 3 themes. We talked about those themes, and we had this public meeting. That some of you attended, and we had some schemes and models and went through it, and there were lots of comments that were then brought together. And then they categorized them, tried to put them into schemes, and those schemes then were presented, and we went through them again, kind of categorizing them, picking pieces that worked better than others. They also, and I do have these if you want to take a look at it, I'll leave them here afterwards if you want to take a perusal of them. And they had numerically categorized them as to, favorable, non-favorable. And we are going to meet up again in early May, and then May 14th, I think, is the next public meeting for input. And I think we kind of decided that phase 1 is, we're looking at phase 1, maybe including more than was kind of shown, to include some changes to YFAP, where it's going, but I wasn't sure at the end of that meeting, and I'm looking at Bobby and George because they were both there. If we decided that in phase 1 that YFAP, we looked at some new building with a grant application, there's a community member who's very successful in grant applications, willing to do one for us. So it was all very good. It's moving fast, and it's a long-term 25 your horizon, does it go up to 50 years? I don't know, it's a long time.
25.
Yeah. It might be 50.
It
But,
might take us 50 years.
Yeah. But City Hall would move over to complete City Hall, and this would be more of commons. Like its name. And I don't know, community members, do you have anything to add there? George?
No, I don't think so. I don't think I have anything to add.
Bobby?
I think you summed it up pretty good. Yeah.
But I do have them here, and I look forward to the next meeting to see how they kind of take all that we re-massaged and come together, and then the public meeting, get more public input.
No, I was wondering, I know that they were at the post office and a
Mhm.
couple of different places and handing out little things. Did they get a pretty good response from the group?
Yeah, they did,
Yeah.
and they have, tabulated all of that, I think that's even included in here. But yeah, and they had a lot of little boxes that you
Right.
could put your input into, and then they had the Survey Monkey online as well, so yeah. Went out of their way to capture community input, I thought.
And we still have those up in City Hall, right? The large, are they in the back corner?
I don't think so.
Okay.
That's when we added Abby's space.
Oh.
Are they available online now?
They are, yeah, they're on the website.
They are, because I couldn't find, so I did master plan or whatever, I couldn't find links to it except for the previous presentation.
Yeah, I haven't seen them online myself.
And I know I emailed them out too after the last meeting. I'll double check. This set is not.
Oh, that's what I'm wondering, if that's on.
No, this won't be until it becomes public at the public meeting on the 14th. Yeah.
So I'm not to share it.
I mean, you can, but we're not putting it out. You know, you can share with the commission members and stuff. But we're putting it out to the public all on the 14th.
Okay. When we have the next public meeting.
So everything that's online should be everything that's been presented to the public. But did you see that?
The slides.
Yeah.
That's.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
I think that approach is something we should keep in mind when it comes time for us to start presenting ideas from Cascadia partners, both in a public forum, that maybe to use like, Survey Monkey or making, sitting out in public and public places and giving others the opportunity to give input, because I keep saying, I don't worry about the people that I hear from, I worry about the people that I don't hear from.
Mhm.
I think we should try our best, especially on something like this, to get as much input from everybody that we can.
I think that's a great idea.
Whether they
Yes.
they attend the meeting or not.
And we can, as commission members, I would think that we could volunteer to do our part of sitting wherever and doing that survey.
Have people take
Yeah.
shots at us.
Very good.
Yep, okay.
Yeah, and I'd be happy
You mean
to
you've got
put
the
the
roster?
survey movie out too, if you guys position yourself around, and I'll volunteer to position yourself around to hear as that community connectors that you all are.
Yeah.
Here, at the very different locations, and I can put the Survey Monkey out. We've been getting really, really good responses, high number of responses from the varying surveys we've done. So and every time we do it, we get more.
That's
People
good.
are feeling like they're being heard.
That's good.
And the public meetings have been very well attended.
Good. Lauren, did you had a chance to look at anything? You were gonna look at
Noxious weeds, I haven't really connected with the group. I think Bobby, were you gonna put out something to the noxious weeds issue?
Yes, I have not yet. I
Okay,
started
good,
with the
Good, okay.
building materials list work group, but we didn't get very far with it.
We haven't talked about that, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else?
The only other thing was, that the FEMA information that was in the packet.
A little overwhelming?
So I have a question about, the color coding on that.
Oh, okay. because we will take it up, but yes, I will definitely address that. I should probably put a little legend. Hang on. Kimmy printed me a packet and I'm really regretting it. Let me see if I can flip to the 30 pages that is FEMA. The coding in that yellow is new language,
Is pardon?
new language.
Okay, new language, okay.
The blue was where our current code differs from the last FEMA suggested code that we adopted, but where we didn't quite adopt it word by word. So not a big deal, but it did make comparing the two a little more difficult. So if we wanted to make that change now, then it'd be a little easier going forward if and when we do this again. The red was stuff that should have been picked up the last time we adopted new FEMA language. So it was either something we didn't insert that we should have inserted, or something that we did insert that shouldn't be there. And so we can go through those when we get into our, I don't think we're gonna have a whole lot of public input on our public hearing, but
And then for some reason, my printer did orange.
oh, well, there was no intended orange. I can't help you with that, but if you show me where you're orange, I can tell you what I meant for it to be. Yeah, I thought 3 colors was already enough, but, well, we just had so much trouble with this part of like not wanting to do 2 years worth of code adoptions all in one. The markup files are really difficult to work with as you move from a Word to PDF. Weird things happen. When you try to tidy them up and send them off, we're seeing, you accept the changes and that deletes the deletions, if you will, which isn't always the intent. So I was trying not to get into a 40-page markup thing. Sorry that I added another color just for you. But just to make it a little easier going forward to say, this is what we mean. Because man, like 3 or 4 times back and forth on some of those markup files really make a mess. Mhm.
Anything else? Anybody else?
I do,
Yeah.
Habitat for Humanity.
Oh, that's right.
So, I have met with, board members and we've talked about opportunities for South Lincoln County with Habitat for Humanity. They have a, 26 years of public, open house kind of thing. Before. But they have a lot more than just, the housing that they do. They give grants out for low income people, they help people work on their homes. And they have grant opportunities for other kinds of housing than just what I thought of as.
Yeah,
I thought of
Yeah.
Habitat for Humanity. So I'm really excited to work with them and to bring opportunities back to yachts and see if we can partner with them. And hoping Bobby will be present for that as well. So yeah, I'm very excited. I'm gonna meet with them again in a couple of weeks, and after that, I'll bring back more information.
Great.
And if anybody has any questions on Habitat for Humanity, I'll seek to find answers.
Would they be a potential addition to the advisory board for our work with Cascadia? Just as sort of a different angle on the same issue. Cascadia had suggested possibly something from the Lincoln County Housing Authority, which I thought was an interesting idea because they sort of have a line on a lot of the stuff that we don't deal with as much, namely our rental market. I've just been trying
Well, I
to
think
find
that's a
other
great idea
agencies
right
that
there.
might bring
Both of
a
them.
different,
Yeah,
that might be harder to get somebody from HALC, from the Housing Authority, just because they're understaffed, but over the years, I've had a lot of dealings with them, and some of them have been really passionate about what they do. So if I could find somebody there, even if they don't come to all of them, but I think they see a part of the puzzle that we don't always see.
yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Okay. I'll let somebody make that motion then when we get into our regular meeting.
Talk about that when you know.
And I'd be happy to represent Habitat for Humanity.
great.
as a board member.
Okay, anything else?
You guys can
Session
take a break and eat some chocolate, because Kimmy filled up all the candy baskets.
I know. Great, that's just what I needed. More chocolate. Okay, so, see, it's 2:45. Let's adjourn till 3 o'clock and then reconvene for the regular session. Okay.
Yeah, we don't want to let you in.